Hello, and welcome to our presentation on virtual reality, history, and ethics, a brief collaboration project for our course related to computers and society presented by Carl Schott, Corey Mosley, Avery Bostick, and Ajden Hasanovic. As a short overview of what we intend to cover in this presentation, we want to demonstrate some of the history and evolutions, ethical concerns and implications, and why virtual reality is important enough to warrant the development and attention it has received in recent years. Throughout the presentation, we will often refer to virtual reality as VR, which is typical terminology used outside of this presentation. A handful of you may ask yourselves, what is VR? Some of you may have experienced VR for yourselves and might understand what VR is, whereas some have not experienced it personally or don't quite understand what all the fuss is about. By definition today, virtual reality is a computer-generated simulation of a three-dimensional image or environment that can be interacted with in a seemingly real or physical way. To be clear, this presentation does not consider augmented reality to be synonymous with VR, but more of a subtype and may be irrelevant to some instances we will be presenting. If you haven't tried full 360-degree VR, I highly recommend it to form your own opinions of the technology, as viewing someone else's three-dimensional experience on a two-dimensional screen just isn't translated well enough. The idea of VR is generally credited to 1930s author Stanley G. Weinbaum, a sci-fi writer famous for his story Pygmalion Spectacles in 1935. The story focused on a set of goggles that let whoever was wearing them experience an alternate world through what he called holographics, as well as alter other senses like smell and touch. Although Weinbaum is credited for his idea of a VR system, the real concept was provided almost 2 decades later with Morton Heilig's Sensorama, which was what really paved the way for research and development of the technology going forward, though it did not gain much traction itself for being too expensive and overly complex. It was a huge booth rather than goggles, which housed a 3D display, fans, smell, generators, and even chair-simulated vibrations. It was more of a 4D experience rather than what we know to be VR today, but it was still highly immersive and impressive for users of the time. Moving forward into the 1960s, we saw the creation of the first motion tracking head-mounted display called the HeadSight. The HeadSight provided a magnetic motion tracking system linked to a very limited closed-circuit camera. It was not used for entertainment, but more of a military technology used to make observations of dangerous situations from a safe location. It was a large evolution for VR technology, yet its components were all in their infancy. This did not stop the technology from ultimately coming together, although it was still expensive and was still missing a key ingredient that had not been affordable itself until recently: a computer system. Jump to 1987, we see the invention of the iPhone. Not the iPhone you're probably thinking of, this iPhone. And this iPhone was not developed by Steve Jobs, but was rather developed by Jaron Lanier, founder of VPL Research, along with the Data Glove. The system was the first of what we would call full VR today, running up to an impressive 6 frames per second. VPL suffered from the same fate typical of VR technology, which was being costly at $250,000 for the bulky, complex system.
And with the 90s came more robust gaming systems with interpretable graphics and consumability. Virtual reality was adopted by some of these companies, such as Nintendo, Sega, and Virtuality. These companies were considered affordable. Unfortunately, they were monochromatic, bulky, and simply could not compete with the rapid development of 2D gaming consoles at the time. The past few years have led to a renaissance in the research and development of VR technology, as modern tech corporations have begun releasing their own versions of VR goggles. This resurgence is largely accredited across the internet to a Kickstarter campaign created in 2012 by Oculus. The campaign is closed with a successful generation of $2.4 million with over 9,000 backers with a goal set of only $250,000. Facebook purchased the company for about $2 billion in 2014 and launched the Oculus Consumer version 1 in 2016. VR technology today is robust, immersive, portable, lightweight, and affordable compared to other consumer technologies. The way it is being utilized and researched is impressive and as though it is right out of a science fiction story or something. It is most commonly noted for novelty use in gaming and entertainment, such as video games and social media interactions, like VR chat, VRcade, 3D modeling, and even VR theaters for platforms like Hulu and Netflix. Some businesses have even opened dedicated VR buildings where players can move freely in large open spaces in a virtual environment. It is being utilized for explorations, both scientific and recreational, allowing people to view the summits of mountaintops, deep water, space, limited entry, or dangerous confined spaces. And the list is limited only to the software we can create. Obviously, the US military is more than enthusiastic about the applications of VR systems for things like explosive ordnance disposal teams, scouting, drone utilizations, training simulations, confidence coursing, and we can only imagine what else. Medical field is also utilizing VR environments to simulate surgeries and other medical procedures for medical students without any real repercussions. Normally, this would be done with a cadaver, which is a difficult training environment to create for multiple reasons, and mistakes can be made rendering a cadaver unusable. But the list of environments and utility goes on and on. Field trips, distance learning, virtual desktops, and whatnot for education. The current factors blocking consumers from modern VR seem to collide into two main categories. A, the technology is cumbersome slash advanced, meaning there are a lot of connections, spec requirements, and the setup involved, and even the physicality of VR itself. Or people simply don't understand the technology. B, the technology is too expensive, requiring a powerful computer for general VR tasking, in addition to the VR systems and conditioning of the technology advancement, lending consumers to be weary of earlier versions. And here are some of the designs of modern VR headsets. They're quite a bit more portable and lightweight than in the past.
Virtual reality has many pros and cons that should be considered. It can expand online communication as we know it. Rather than being limited to online chat, voice calls, or even video calls, VR apps like VRChat can create a new way of interacting with people that would be most similar to that how one would interact with a person in real life. Virtual reality could also be used as practice for people in fields that have risky workplaces such as surgeons, architects, and aviators. Although there may be some good to VR, such as the app Fearless that helps individuals overcome their fear of spiders, there is also a negative side to VR, which includes many legal issues as well as some health related issues. Another issue is that intellectual property can be easily violated. In the game Second Life, for example, players can visit public places and interact with items and merchandise from real brands that have trademarks and copyrights. Virtual reality allows users to import photos, music, and brand names without necessary permissions from the owners of the IP. Also, if a designer or someone else who would design using VR, like an engineer, were to design something such as a building or furniture, there is no right stating that the design is yours, unless the company you are working for specifically states it in the terms of condition. VR can also lead to certain emotions and sufferings due to the realistic nature, even though it's a virtual environment. Crimes that can happen within VR include groping, assault, stealing of virtual property, illegal betting, identity theft, nudity, and orgies. This can all become much more serious with larger prevalence of bodysuits. With full bodysuits, you would be able to feel punches, kicks, and more. In 2016, a woman playing Quiver experienced sexual assault. In the game, someone tried to rub her chest and then proceeded to chase her when she attempted to flee. VR has the ability to evoke real emotions and feelings, and because of this, she stated that it was like a real experience. There are no laws that say sexual assault in VR is the same as being sexually assaulted in real life. VR can also have many health related side effects such as dizziness, motion sickness, headaches, eyesores, and seizures to those who are more prone to getting seizures. VR may also become an addiction for some and may lead to concentration issues in education, more eye problems, and obesity from decreased physical movement.
There are concerns to consider when it comes to virtual reality and the technology behind it. In the professional world, it's realistic to think that an advertising market will arise within the VR world. We may be seeing advertisements inside our VR universes and possibly spam inside the platform could happen. It's possible that VR will take off and the act of physically going to work could become obsolete using VR. Every employee would have their headset and could do all their work from their home. But from that, you can imagine that with these virtual workplaces, employees would start to become untruthful with their work, maybe get others to do the work, and possibly not actually be who they say they are. Legally, there's the opportunity for virtual criminality, or someone committing illegal acts through virtual reality technology. Also, the concern of regulating intellectual property. How can we say who does the idea belong to without it becoming a he said, she said issue? Ethically, we have to think about protecting our users. They could be physically injured, obviously from having the headset on and tripping or hitting a body part. They could be psychologically injured, tortured, or other mind damaging ways. And the possibility of getting addicted to the technology is a concern as well. There needs to be ways to prevent these problems because they are a real threat and definitely unethical. Humans need interaction in society to thrive and be happy. Using VR technology in an excessive amount could have humans experiencing loneliness and isolation. There needs to be warnings for people that use VR too much in order to prevent these problems. There will be legal restrictions arising as virtual reality technology becomes more prevalent. Mostly it will concern intellectual property, who owns it, how to dispute it, and such. Patents, copyright, and trademarks will be disputed, and claims against infringement will be an issue. Claims from the users against the VR companies, claims from the companies against the users, and user against user claims will all be a problem. Virtual crimes, what constitutes a virtual crime, and how to make as clear as possible what is and what isn't will need to be figured out. Virtual reality is an insanely important technology that has and continues to impact our society immensely. We have come far in education, expanded how careers can develop through simulations and other real life scenarios. And still, virtual reality seems to be in its infancy with how much more can be improved and expanded. It is very important that we will continue to see VR in society for the foreseeable future. In conclusion, we have to stay concerned about overusage and the negative effects for users. But overall, VR is a monumental step forward in education and society.